Because you were fond of the
Fond of the Irish, yes.
Yeah. Well,
I'm a racist.
the point I think is worth pressing because a lot of people, as you know, spend many hours agonizing as postulants of your religion, and I do think that one of your forms is, as I say, this ruthless self-criticism, which in itself is very interesting. Of course, we've seen it before, haven't we? St. Augustine and other of your predecessors.
My literary letters.
And, a point that no doubt was raised in Notre Dame.
Yeah,
But my point is that at the end, you forgive yourself as a generous man.
Full of compassion.
That's right, yeah, as a compassionate man. But this doesn't necessarily happen to all the people who read you, I suppose. They tend to consider as mitigating the fact that your muse has been stimulated into Stakhanovite activity every time you get into a jam. But this doesn't necessarily mean that you were right in what you did. Isn't that correct? But doesn't your book, in effect, contend to this?
No, what I was trying to do in the book, if I can say what I was trying to do, because I listened with enormous interest to everything you were saying, because it was as Greek to me. Really, I didn't see the book that way. I didn't see it as a tremendous confession. I thought it was rather a superficial presentation of myself and my attitudes.
Why superficial?
I didn't go deeply into... I mean, I could write another book below this book, if you will, which would be 3 times as long and happily 10 times as deep. This book, because I was writing about myself in the third person, I felt there was a comic vein that could not be ignored, which I liked and enjoyed. In fact, I think there's nothing more health restoring than to write about yourself in the third person for a period of 9 weeks and 90,000 words. It gives you an incredible detachment about yourself and a sort of tolerance and good humor, not only about your foibles but about your virtues, which is very important. Because, we all tend to have a certain charity for our foibles, but we always, if we're not careful, we get too serious about our virtues. When suddenly we see the virtues in relation to the foibles, and we take a certain detachment from ourselves, things get a little less irritating, a little less maddening, a little less, over-passionate. But what I would like to get back to really is that what I intended in the book was to show that there's that for years there's been this newspaper legend that has grown up about me, which was overblown and anomalous, and finally it was ridiculous. It had me as some sort of a savage, barbaric version of Hemingway. And in fact, I'm half the man's size, and physically, and probably in literary ways as well. And I just felt that it's part of the madness of America. For years I felt that the greatest trouble with this country is that it's insane. Not the people, but the social mechanisms of the country are insane. Oddly enough, we'd agree on half the social mechanisms that are insane and part company altogether on the others. But one of the things I felt, one of the tiny things that I felt it was certainly insane about was me. Now, everyone has the idea, because I write about myself all the time, I think I'm enormously important. I don't, but it's the one thing I really do know something about. It's the one thing I claim to be an expert on, is myself and my own intellectual adventures. And in fact, I'm even on record as claiming that I'm an intellectual adventurer. Because for me, the interest in an idea is not necessarily in verifying its certainty, because one rarely can. It's in getting an intimation of whether it's a well-placed or nicely proportioned idea by the way you feel it as it passes through you. In other words, an existential approach to the intellectual life. So I wrote this book not to exculpate myself, but to show that Time magazine finally was a little mad. They were part of the madness. That the newspaper coverage of this event was part of the madness because it didn't enter it. You see, it condemned from without, which is, by the way, the absolute mark of the psychotic. I worked in a mental hospital years ago when I was in college for a summer, actually for a week because I couldn't take it for too long. And one of the things about all psychotics in this mental hospital, or almost all of them, was that they all condemned. They had an extraordinary power to condemn. It was absolutely unbelievable. They had very little perception of what was going on, but so far as they could perceive anything, they immediately condemned it.
Well, are we talking about psychotics and or Time magazine?
If you notice, I lumped them together, yes.
Yeah. Well, now, I think it would be interesting, since you yourself selected that as a point of departure, to understand your book and your entire experience, perhaps by considering the rendition of it that was reported in Time magazine, which struck me even after reading your book as perfectly accurate.
Well, it was perfectly accurate in a superficial way. I chose that not because it was a, we all know you could take an example of Time reporting that would be incredibly inaccurate. I took this because superficially it was quite accurate. If you insist upon looking at everything I do in my book on a superficial basis, then you'll find the Time magazine version is accurate. But what I was interested in is that the real quality of an experience is never captured by not only Time, but by everything Time stands for. In other words, that kind of journalism, which appropriates experience rather than entering it. You see, there's a
Excuse me a second. Well, now, wait a minute. Let's back up a moment. In fact, as you recognize in the book, you were very drunk, right, when you were addressing this protest audience.
Well, no, not very drunk. Very drunk. First of all, Time said I was staggering. They were wrong on that. I wasn't staggering. The proof that I wasn't staggering, I wasn't that drunk, is that after the meeting was over, I got down off the stage, walked around, talked to people, went to a party where I continued to drink for hours, and so home.
Well, that's not exactly proof.
Well, it's proof. Generally, when a man's staggering, he's a remarkable fellow if he continues to stagger for the next 5 or 6 hours.
But you are.
You've got to be an Irishman to stagger for 5 or 6 hours.
Well, I think that's a valid judgment, maybe. But Time Magazine's point, I think, was that that you moved into the situation, took advantage of it, perhaps because you were nervous, as indeed you were. Self-conscious, as indeed you were. I'm quoting you, not Time, at this particular moment. And that under the circumstances, it was a pretty conspicuous Mailer performance. I mean, the kind of thing that people talk about for years to come.
I think in all these years, I've probably had about 3 or 4 occasions when I have had a lot to drink and talked in public, and maybe more.
Well, that's why I say highly conspicuous.
A highly conspicuous Mailer performance. When you say a Mailer performance, it assumes it's the sort of thing that goes on once a week.
No. I say highly conspicuous. Assuming that you were drunk every time you talked, it wouldn't have been highly conspicuous. Any more than would have been highly conspicuous if Joey Lewis, let's say.
Well, the sense I got from your 4 words was that it was a typical Mailer performance.
Well,
you see, now maybe I
you
misinterpreted.
should study the inflections of the language.
I was listening to the nuances of your voice.
Well, what Time Magazine, after all, said was after more obscenities, Mailer introduced poet Robert Lowell, who got annoyed at requests to speak louder. I'll bellow, but it won't do any good, he said, and proceeded to read from Lord Weary's Castle. By the time the action shifted to the Pentagon, Mailer was perky enough to get himself arrested by 2 marshals. Quotes, I transgressed a police line, he explained with some pride, on the way to the lockup, where the toilet facilities are scarce indeed, and the coffee mugs are low octane.
Isn't that pure Time? Where the toilet facilities are scarce.
That's pretty good, don't you think?
It's good for Time.
After all, you were talking about micturation in your book. I never thought I'd hear you utter a word with that many syllables.
That's it's the influence. It's because of our close and continuing correspondence. That's another example of Time Magazine at work, though. They earlier in this they talk of my engaging in a scatological solo. Extraordinarily ambiguous remark. I mean, what was I doing? Was I acting like a monkey, throwing gobbets? That's what you get from the idea of a scatological solo. Whereas actually, the confession I made that night was about micturation, wasn't it? See, now there's a physical, spiritual, and probably a philosophical difference between scatological matters and acts of micturation.
Well, I can see that you're a student of the subject, but
I'm glad you can keep up with me.
No, I didn't say I could. I said I can see that you're a student of the subject. Let's try to refocus the discussion. Mine is that Time Magazine observed a lot of people